Hello ladies, happy Tuesday. I hope y'all are doing good today. Tonight we are going to be talking about saddles. Oh, I'm super stoked about this. This is kind of going to be a base overview. We're not going to get into a ton of the details. I probably will need to do at least one more video, maybe two more videos. I'm trying to decide if I want to bring on a pelvic floor lady or not. I have several that are friends. So it'll just be picking one of them. Maybe Buffy, she does the pelvic floor model on the Core Crushers, the program that has the pelvic floor module in it. Might bring her on to talk about some of it. But today, saddles. A couple of things we're going to go over is how hard can be a good thing and how we need to look at our fit for it, and also how the tilt can play a big role in our saddle and our position on it. So just as a FYI, I just want to know how many people have issues with their saddles. I remember I used to have a ton of issues with saddle positioning, saddle fit, just feeling comfortable on the bike. Those were huge things for me. I think it's huge for a lot of ladies that as we start breaking into mountain biking and or riding as a whole, it can be one of the things that holds us back. I personally don't ride with a chamois. I ride with just some wool underwear and then my shorts over top of it. I am not a big fan of the chamois. Some ladies are. I also don't do extremely long rides. Like I'm not putting out 50 miles and I'm not on the saddle the entire time through it. So those can be kind of some differences within if you do need a chamois or not. I also live in a very humid climate. And so having a chamois makes me feel like I'm wearing a wet diaper, and also it holds a lot of moisture in towards my labia, towards all of my bits, as I call it, and it just doesn't feel good. And it seems I've also just TMI a little bit of issues with yeast infections here and there, and it doesn't help me with managing those at all. We're not going to branch into pelvic floor specific muscles and or different things within that. As I said earlier, I'm going to be potentially bringing on a pelvic floor physical therapist to talk a little bit more about some of that. Also, if you didn't know, I have a pelvic floor module that a pelvic floor physical therapist did in the Core Crushers. It's helped a lot of ladies understand and just get a little bit more acquainted with their pelvic floor because it's a super important area. And saddles play a big role in that, but we're not going to branch that far into the weeds tonight. Who has a saddle that they love? Anybody? Anybody have a saddle that they love? I do. I like actually two of them. This is the Specialized Mimic. I think it's the Power is this one. And then I also have a WTB that's on my mountain bike. This one's on my trainer inside. I'm on it a little bit more so than I am on my mountain bike saddle. And also the orientation just on my trainer is different than my mountain bike. So I prefer this one a little bit more so on my trainer than I do on my mountain bike, but there's important parts of it. I'm going to use this as the example for tonight to talk about some things. So how are you supposed to sit on these things? You know, are you supposed to weight your nose? That's more of your front on your clit, on more of the front part of your labia. Are you supposed to rest here? Not necessarily. Are you supposed to rest on the rest of your bits, on the rest of your labia, on the main part of your vulva? Like, are you supposed to rest here? Again, not necessarily. You're actually supposed to rest on what we call your sit bones. So if you stand up and you feel into your butt, you're going to feel part of your pelvic bone. You're going to feel part of that pelvis. That is the base part. So if you sit on someone's lap and they're like, oh my gosh, you have a bony butt, that is part of your sit bones. That is probably the main part of your sit bones. And that what you dig in, or even if you're sitting right now, if you can shift side to side, you'll probably feel that boniness sticking down in. That is what you're technically supposed to be resting on the saddle. And so if your saddle is too soft, gel-like, or other things where you sink down in it too much, then you're going to be pushing on more of the soft tissue around it. Some of the muscles, potentially your sciatic nerve, also some of your lady bits in the middle and or part of your clit and other furthermost parts or your more forward parts of your labia. And that can pinch it, that can put more pressure on that. You can also cut off different arteries that go to that region. I mean, it's a pretty sensitive region. We also have some nerves that come to that region too. And if you were cutting off circulation or nerves, like signaling, then it's probably not going to feel so good. And so having a super soft saddle will make it where you potentially put more pressure on those parts. And so a harder saddle might be good for you if you were feeling some of those pressures. Whenever I was looking for saddles and I was having issues, I was actually having more sit bone bruising feeling, not any of the other like issues with front parts and other soft tissue parts. I actually felt like I was bruised underneath my ischial tuberosities, or AKA my sit bones. And so I needed a little softer of a saddle to give me a smidge of a cushion through there, because I had too hard of a saddle through that. And I know a lot of people don't like talking about, they don't want to push you to have a softer saddle because they're nervous that it's going to put too much pressure on the other soft tissue, lady bits, clit, vulva, all of those things, and can cause you numbness and or other dysfunctions through that. And we obviously don't want that, as we just talked about, but I needed a little bit more softness to that. And this is also when I was wearing chamois. And I was like, man, I need to like put like 3 chamois on. Like I am so sore in there. Like just my sit bones were so bruised feeling. And this was like, yes, you can have that initially as you're starting to get riding, as like things start to get accustomed to sitting on a harder surface. This was like months into my like summer season of riding, whenever I should have been well past that point. And it was that I needed just a smidge more cushion in the saddle to help me with it. Also, the tilt of your saddle can play a role. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on, and I will talk about how that affected me. Does anybody have numbness or other issues in their saddle position? And this is a safe place to talk about it. Sorry. One of the reasons why I like the Specialized Mimic for my trainer, one, I'm on the saddle a little bit more. And so it's important that I have cushion systems in different places. If you haven't felt a Specialized Mimic, there's a little place in the center here. I forgot the girl that originally helped design this, but she was having some other issues front. So there's that green part through there. And as you look, I don't know if you can see this, see how I'm pushing in right there, and see how much I'm able to push in through here. It's a ton softer. Here's a lot more softer as well. And so it takes off pressure. Now, as you get to the nose, that doesn't have as much cushion through there, but it really helps cushion up some of your lady bits as you are moving forward and changing your position on the saddle for the Mimic specifically. There's other saddles that do this too, I think, but it's something to just pay attention to as you are trying out different saddles for that. So a little bit harder, more firm where your sit bones are. That's where you're supposed to be sitting on your saddle. Lady bits have more softness through that. And also you want to watch how the cutouts, because some have cutouts through here, what the transition over into the cutout is. Is that going to cause an abrupt line? And I always go back to like sitting on the toilet seat for too long. Anybody else do that? Have you done that before? Well, I have. And you'll get up and you'll be like, oh my gosh, my legs are numb because I just smushed my sciatic nerve for too long, and I now have tingling in my legs. Well, you can do the same thing here if there's too much of a abrupt drop and or that edge doesn't have enough cushion with it. You can get some front groin pitching if you have some other hip joint anatomy issues. It might be worth checking out some of those aspects, and maybe even looking into a PT to do an assessment on you for that. If it's more so like groin here wise through that. And I figure that's what you call, unless you're talking about like up in this area of your groin. Michelle says, I get so much pain with a hard saddle. I'm feeling like a donkey kicked me in the bum and my internal parts. Michelle, you might be a little bit more like me and actually need just a smidge of a softer saddle. Also, you notice with this Mimic, really see it from the back a little bit more. It sheds off to the side a little bit more. And you can also see how it's not all the way flat through it. So my mountain biking saddle that I wear, or that I use, is a WTB, and it's a little bit more flat. This one's fairly flat. Some of them have like a little bit of a ramp at the end. They kind of kick up at the end. These are all things to look at to see how your fit is. Also, as we go more into fit, Michelle says literally like the whole area between legs is bruised for less for days. Michelle, you need to go get another saddle. That's not good. Stephanie says, once just the chamois, the numbness went away. The seams were creating pressure points. I completely agree. My chamois did not do me any favors. They just made me wiggle my ass around on top of the saddle and almost kind of like slide forward and almost like slide off of the edge of my seat. Vanessa, only on one side, feels like pain on the inner thigh, tendons on the new saddle. It might be that your saddle has too much width here. So how far forward and how far back you sit on it. And that might need to change your forward and back position of where you have your saddle on the bike in particular. Because if you're sitting too far back, then you could actually hit some tendons and some other things on like the flares of your saddle, and that if you actually brought your saddle back some, then you wouldn't hit it quite as much through that, Vanessa. This is something to try for you. Mandy says, new bike, new saddle, way more chamois chafing. Is it the saddle position? I also just ordered a larger saddle. Can be the saddle position. Also can just be that you don't do well with that particular saddle. I remember whenever I got a new bike years ago, that before I like switched out all my saddles and would like covet my saddles and keep them with me, is that I tried this other one and I even demoed some bikes and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can last for this full ride. Like my everything hurt down there. Like it was terrible. I was complaining to my husband probably within the first 5 minutes. Karen says not up and in where the leg meets the outer labia. That might also then, Karen, be a little bit of that same thing where you need to move your saddle forward or back, or look at how much it flares as a whole, because it might be putting pressure through that. So let's move a little bit more into fit. How many of y'all have gotten fit for your saddles or know your sit bone width? So sit bone width, where you have your sit bones right through here, it's not the same as your width of your pelvis. And so somebody can have a wide pelvis, a wide hip width through here, but have narrow sit bones. Other people, they can be more narrow and their sit bones sit farther wide than what others that have a little bit wider of pelvis at the top, their crest, what that is. And so it's important not to just relate this back to your hip width and what size pants you wear. And you like look at somebody and be like, what size sit bones, what length sit bones or what width sit bones do you have? It needs, and you should go get fitted. And so different shops have these things. They're basically a gel pad. You sit on them, your feet come up, and it's making sure that you're gonna get good indentions on that gel pad, and so they can measure the distance through that. So then whenever you go to find your saddle, you can buy one that's specifically made for your width of your sit bones. If you don't have this, find a shop that does it. There's so many that have it. Also, the same shops that have that potentially have a saddle rental policy. If you ever come towards Sycamore Cycles in Pisgah area, Western North Carolina, they have a saddle rental, or you buy the saddle and you can return it back. And so you can try several different types of saddles there to see which one works for you with the flares, no flares, how shed off are they more flat through there? All of those things matter and can help you with distributing your load best on this smaller platform for longer periods and times. Making sure you go get measured. If anybody's asked the saddle question, making sure you're getting measured for your saddle is super important for it. Also, if you have, just a side note, if you have like sit bone tendon bursitis or where your hamstrings attach up into, you probably won't like a flared off or more rounded off edged for your saddle. You want it to be more flat and then be done, because this puts a little bit more point specific pressure on the inside most aspect of that sit bone, and it doesn't distribute it out towards the other sides. I think that's why I like, for my mountain bike, I like it to be more flat through here. And then for my trainer, I'm totally good with this position based on what I'm doing on the trainer for it. Jennifer said, my groin area gets tingly when I ride. Am I sitting wrong? I love the seat with my lid. It was super comfortable. When I got my full suspension, switched my seat over, and now I'm getting tingling. So that brings up a really good point, Jennifer. Not all saddles are the same for different bikes, and or you need to look at how forward or back your saddle is, and or the tilt of it. We're going to be talking about the tilt in just a second for it. But the forward and back part can make a difference for where you're getting and crossing over from your sit bones, like your butt area, over into your vulva region through here. And if your lady is getting pinched or not, or putting more pressure up into your vulva where things are not, like the numbness and other arteries are not going through and delivering their signals across. All right, perfect. Any questions on fit? Any questions on the hardness and how some hardness can be good and other hardness can be not quite as good, but we tend to move you towards more of a hard saddle than a soft gel saddle because of all these lovely bits that we want to make sure that we still have pleasure in later when we are off the bike for it. Tilt for your saddle. Typically, we want a flat, or what's told for us is that we want a flat saddle through here. You can see. That might be a little bit easier to see. If you have any issues with your back and or with core engagement, you know what you do? You just tilt that nose down just ever so slightly for it. Because now what you're doing is that the pelvis that sits on top of that, so this is your pelvis that sits on top of that. I'm using a yoga block through here. If you are flat, then your abs and stuff, you're not going to be able to use them quite as well. But if you tilt them forward, then to engage them properly, do that, that's probably a little bit better. So if you tilt it forward just a little bit, I'm going to exaggerate. Then to engage your abs properly, you can tilt back your pelvis, just like we talked about in the last Facebook Live that I did about core control and pelvis control, is that we use our abs to actually tilt our pelvis back. And so let me show you here. And so if I'm sitting on the edge of the chair, and you're welcome to sit on the edge of your chair, wherever you are, if you can right now. And so you'll see how that'll tilt my pelvis a little bit forward. And so I'm tilted a little bit forward through here. And then to use my core, I contract, and that brings my pelvis into a more backward tilting or more flat now position. But if I sit back, I'm already a little bit more in that back position, and I'm probably not going to engage these guys as much to tilt me back even farther, because it's not as profitable for me as I ride the bike. And so as I'm on the edge, or as we tilt this guy down just slightly, now I can use my core, my abs, to tilt my pelvis back, and that'll give me a little bit better engagement. And so if you have any other back issues, back stress, other issues with using your glutes as much, having a little tilt down can actually do you some really beneficial good. Another reason why you would do a little tilt down is to take some pressure off of your clit and the front part of your labia and not have as much pinching up through that. Make sure you don't tilt it down too much, that you start to slide forward, because that's going to equal that you can have more rubbing, more pressure, more chafing, all of those things, because you have too much tilt down forward, and you're basically falling off the front part of your saddle through that. So not too much tilt, just enough where you get a little bit, but not too much of a good thing through that. Also note with just chafing and other aspects, do you feel comfortable to keep your butt on your saddle and not shift in different ways? Because if you don't feel comfortable to stay there, then as you're riding, you're shifting back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and that's a constant rubbing on all of your bits, including your sit bones, your labia, all of that stuff is getting shifted forward and back on and just rubbed, and that's obviously not helpful and good for us, and it's going to equal more chafing, more other issues that you have along the way for that. Has this been helpful for y'all? Have y'all learned any nuggets of goodness for it? So main things, hard can be good. It can also be too hard, like in my case, give you more bruised feeling through that. Make sure you get a fit for understanding the width of what your sit bones are and how you need to be supported through that. And that if you need a more flat saddle or one that's more rounded off through that. Also making sure that you're not feeling other numbness and stuff and how things kind of drop off and in, and that you have a little bit either cut out or some softness in through here, so you don't put pressure on your other lady bits, and so you can still have pleasure in other different ways, because that's very important. I did a talk at the hub when I talked some of this about, and all the girls were up front because it was the main ladies' night, and the guys were in the back at the bar, and I was talking, I was like, y'all, guys, listen up. Buy your lady the saddles, pay the money for the good saddles, because you still want to have fun. And there was other ladies there were lesbians as well. Shout out for Pride Week for that. And it was also said to them too, of like, make sure y'all keep your ladies happy. All of them, you know. And this is a specific area of making sure we have that. We need to make sure that this is supported. This is an important part. And you don't need to skimp on this part, because if you have other numbness issues, if you have other things that are affecting your pelvic floor, then this is going to affect that. And that's a main part of a lot of us ladies as we age, is that we need to make sure our pelvic floor is happy, healthy, that's holding things in. Y'all, I need my organs to stay up and in. I don't need to have any prolapse issues. I also don't have any too much tightness issues for it. And so this is super important. Like, trade with other friends if they haven't found it. Talk to your local bike shops to see if they'll return different ones. Like, make sure you don't have other issues through here, and that you get things working and going fluidly for this. If you have other pelvic floor issues, make sure you see a pelvic floor PT. They are so underrated for how much they can do for helping. I had a pelvic floor PT come in. She did a module for the core crushers, and people love it. Talks about breathing, how to control, how to know if you have tightness issues or not, and how to help with both strength and tightness issues. All right, ladies, have a fantastic night, and I hope that this is helpful for you. And let me know if there are other questions you have. Have a wonderful day. Ask me any questions. I'll be popping back in and checking. Have a good night, y'all.